a big milestone
It is?
for us. Episode
Wow,
50.
dude. That's awesome. And I mean, because we record every week, most weeks. That is almost 1 year in. I don't know when our first episode went live, but that is pretty awesome, dude.
Yeah, we missed a few weeks here and there, so we've probably been doing it a year and some change, but that's like 50 years in podcast years.
I don't know how many in dog years. Dude, that's awesome. That's a big milestone.
Yeah.
It's a lot of, it's just hard to keep up doing this stuff, every week. And now I have 2 podcasts and Go Rails and stuff. So it's like a lot of recording these days, but it's a lot of fun, man. I enjoy this. So hopefully other people like listening to this as well.
I enjoy it too because it forces us to talk once a week.
Yeah, and we usually did in the past, but it might go, a couple weeks and be like, how you been, man? And now it's a good, really good. Oh, yeah, it looks like our first episode was published June 8th, 2018. So we are well past a year now. But yeah, I'm with you. It's like a great time to catch up and whatever, and just like regularly stay in touch, and then hopefully stay in touch with, listeners too, even though we don't get to hear them talking ever. But
right. Yeah, no, it's good because we haven't talked this week, and then forces us to do it today, and figure today's good because we can just get in the weeds. It's just
it is, man, it's weird to think that it's Thursday this week already. I had kind of my dad's a farm manager at a bank and manages people's like farms that they own a farm, but don't like, they're not farmers and don't live in the area or whatever. And so yesterday I actually went to this like farm progress show in central Illinois, and man, like it is incredible. Like the autonomous combines and tractors and stuff they have out there. There is some incredible technology happening in farming and stuff. Like it seems like it's still a ways off, but at some point you can imagine like we don't need farmers. We just need robotic machines going in and harvesting and planting and all that. It's pretty incredible. There's like this mobile app you can take a picture of a kernel of corn or an ear of corn. It will count all the kernels on the like half that it can see and estimate your entire like field yield based on one picture like that, which is insane. So it was pretty fun to like go see that, but it really threw my week off because here it is Thursday and it feels like the week's almost over, but it really also feels like Monday because I wasn't working yesterday.
Yeah, I noticed you're offline. I was wondering what you were doing.
Yeah,
that's
it
interesting.
was just kind of a random thing. He was like, "Hey, you want to go? I got an extra ticket." And I was like, "Of course, it sounds awesome." It's cool just to keep an eye on. Well, like you might get hired to go work at Climate Corp or like some company that builds stuff like that, but that was a great way to like see it from the perspective of the farmers, who are shopping around and buying stuff versus like us as developers building things. We're usually kept out of the loop of like what the customers are looking for on something of that scale, so yeah, I enjoy doing that stuff once in a while. And it always gives you ideas of like, man, maybe we should just get into farming or whatever, like, build software for that. But yeah, pretty cool. How have you been?
I'm good. I was sick Monday, Tuesday. My youngest had like the stomach bug all weekend. And then I was the only other one that got it, which is good. But
also
Shannon,
not good.
Poor Shannon. She was taking care of essentially like 3 kids Monday and Tuesday.
So, you guys better now, or?
Yeah, we both rallied. I was only sick like Monday night, I was out a little bit Tuesday because I was just like drained. But yeah, other than that, I'm good. I've been going through a lot of personal changes, I guess. I don't know how to describe it. I've been trying to like pull back in a lot of areas. Like I don't know if we've ever mentioned this, but like we talk, you know, you and I, every week after we record, we talk for like 30 minutes to an hour. And it's always like, I just have so much I'm doing. Like I just say yes to everything. And so I've been trying to like pull back and not put too much pressure on myself.
That's
That's been
great,
really
man.
good.
Yeah, that is. I'm notoriously bad for doing that too, and it's it is very tough when you overcommit yourself or whatever. Even and it's like it's like a slow creep, and at some point you're like, oh my god, I'm overwhelmed. But it was like 7 or 8 yeses ago. You were like, that's where I should have
Right.
stopped, but it wasn't until way later when I realized like, uh-oh, what have I done?
I've made a
Yeah.
huge mistake. Yeah. I always want to do all the things. Like, so I work a day job. I then have two like side project SaaS apps I've been building like with co-founders who are non-technical. And like that really is a big time like commitment. And then I want to do all the like open source things, so like start pay with you and then start Madmen and then like start Jumpstart with you and then everything just like I always just bail out of those projects and
Well, yeah, it's like that's how many full-time jobs you just listed off there, like
without like mentioning like wife and
yeah.
kids and like
Oh man.
so I found myself in a pattern like the last year of just like always feeling guilty. Like I always, am messaging you like, man, I'm so sorry, so sorry. I'm like unreliable. And like you're always like, you have so many things. And finally I like took in what you said. And I was like, yeah. So I've been trying to cut back and not I don't know, not put so much pressure on myself, not commit to all the things and just try and be like good at a couple of
That's good,
things.
man. I'm 1,000% in that boat right now of overcommitted. Just like, well, even and you've been going through the trenches on Stripe stuff lately, but like that's coming up. It potentially affects non EU based businesses. So I'm like working on trying upgrading my Stripe stuff and Go Rails and Hatchbox and Jumpstart and the PageM and all that to support it. But that's on top of that. That's the thing that's like thrown in front of you that you have to like do, but it's not going to get you any features. Like this isn't improving anything. It's just like,
Yeah,
great, now one of our foundations has eroded away and we have to rebuild it. And like it is not. It is painful when those things happen. And I like in the past I was just a developer and didn't worry much about the business side of things, and that stuff would happen and I would just be like, oh, whatever, we got to do it because that's the right thing to do long term. But now having that perspective of the business owner as well, I'm like, oh, this really sucks. And you want to do it right away, but it's
yeah.
also like a thing that comes up, and like, we don't necessarily have to do it as US based companies, but seems like a very good thing to do, and it's something I can do screencasts on, and so I'll get some benefit out of it probably, but it just feels like extra
Sure.
costs, and it's painful.
It is painful. And like I've spent almost 2 months because it wasn't just, okay, swap over like SCA for us. It was get to the latest Stripe API, get to the latest like Stripe Ruby gems so we can implement the new payment intents and
Which was like you had to
Stripe.
upgrade a Stripe API version too, right?
Well, so yeah, we were a bit behind. So like I had to make kind of big jumps in Stripe API versions. And then what was it? Oh yeah, Stripe Ruby mock.
Oh,
Uh, Yeah, I know they're looking for more maintainers. Uh, and I can't imagine trying to keep up with Stripe's
Right.
API.
And to build
So
that,
like,
to mock Stripe's API, you're almost implementing Stripe, like on a very low or light
exactly.
level, but yeah, you've got to, keep track of, well, if we create a charge, then when you query the customer and look for their charges, it should show up there too, which means we need to kind of store like a database. Maybe it's just in memory and as a hash or something simple, but like you still have to keep track of all of that and organize it the way Stripe does internally and on some level. So, I understand maintaining that is a huge pain in the butt. And that brings up, for pay, I believe we're using Stripe Ruby Mock, at least for some of it. Most of what we have is simple subscriptions and charges and stuff, so it's not anything too complicated. But Braintree doesn't really have an equivalent, and so for that, I just used VCR and recorded all of the API requests and play them back. Which Stripe has their test API, and potentially that might be a better option for us to keep up with Stripe changes to the API in the page M, just so that we can say, well, we'll hit against the real Stripe test API, record all the API requests, and store those as replayable things for our test suite. Have you guys thought about going in that direction at all? Because I don't know if I was going to ask too if payment intents or anything were in the Stripe Ruby mock at all yet.
I think they got merged in to master, I think, but it was after like we went through the upgrade process. So I experimented with going the VCR route. I probably spent like 3 or 4 days on it because we used VCR at my last job when we were on Braintree to do those requests to record them. And the problem we had was we had factories that were tightly integrated with Stripe. And so like requests that you wouldn't like think need Stripe make Stripe calls. And so like I ended up with like thousands of Stripe calls.
Okay.
Yeah. So like we've talked about how we're going to move forward with it. But it just wasn't like, it wasn't an option right then, like to try and refactor that. Cause like there's a deadline. And so I thought about, okay, well, I'll fork Stripe Ruby Mock and like try and make the necessary changes. But like you said, like Stripe Ruby Mock is trying to essentially re-implement Stripe at a certain level. And it's not just as easy as like, oh, I'll fork it and make changes. It's like a lot of conceptual things you have to put together. And like that wasn't really an option either because that was going to take a while. So I ended up just kind of stubbing and mocking certain Stripe calls and just returning what I needed, which wasn't ideal, but it got us moving along.
Yeah, that'll work, in the current term, and then you can make it more robust as you go further. And that's one of those just trade-offs you have to deal with, I guess, as you go, because you have a fairly strict deadline of September, what is it, 25th? 24th? 14th. Oh boy. I don't even remember anymore. It's just, I know it's looming ahead of me, and I guess I'm a little bit lucky in that hopefully I don't have to deal with it, but I need to. So
I'll tell you the thing that was an unexpected result of going to payment intents. So Monday, I rolled out the code to go from charges to payment intents. And all things considered, it wasn't the worst rollout I've ever done. But we had one that was, I think it was like a fraud charge, but it was triggering 3D Secure like from a card in the US.
Huh.
And like, I was like, I didn't expect this to be a thing. And so like we handle it now, and then we're rolling out SCA code today, or I don't like shipping on Friday, so probably today or Monday. But hopefully, like in an ideal world, when the SCA code goes out, nothing breaks until the 14th, right?
Yeah.
It just kind of
Yeah,
transitions.
hopefully you
We'll
have,
see what happens.
several days ahead of time to have it in production running and verify working before the actual deadline.
I don't know how to test SCA in production though. I have no
Oh,
3D
that's a
secure
great point.
cards.
Yeah, if anyone wants to tweet their credit card number for us to test with, just let us know.
But I am so tired of living in not just Stripe land, but just payment
Yeah.
land.
Yeah, it is a necessary evil, I guess I would say. And it's a little, man, payments felt pretty intuitive until this change, and now it's like just kind of a nightmare because you have to deal with this. Um, it's kind of their state now across your requests because you have to keep track of, well, the payment's not finished yet, but we have to wait until it is and keep track of that, and just makes it messy. And the Stripe docs are referencing like the old stuff and the new stuff all over the place, and it feels dumb that Stripe has that, and I understand why they do, because not everyone needs the new code, but at the same time it would be way better probably if everyone implemented the new approach and then that was the only set of instructions. I feel like that would be a much easier for everyone, because it seems like, yeah, this is happening in the EU, but we also have now moved to chip and pin in the US, and hopefully we'll add these same kind of SCA things in the US, because it's just good business. Like it's for protecting customers to make sure they're not getting charged for stuff that they just forgot about or whatever, and this is good for them, and so that's good for business too. But yeah, it's a lot of work.
One thing I'll mention before we move out of Stripe land, well, I guess two things. The first is that there is a Stripe like mock API written in Go, like from
Oh,
Stripe.
cool.
And the only reason I didn't adopt it is because it can't have any concept of state, which several of our tests rely on, like a Stripe state, which is, Stripe Ruby mock will hold that in memory, like you said.
Yeah,
So
that seems
I keep an eye on that.
far less easy to test with then, because you have to kind of simulate that, and kind of the whole point is you're yeah, I mean, if it changes, then in Stripe's API, you're gonna have to make sure your tests get updated equivalently, which is another source of errors at some point whenever that changes.
Yeah, so I just kind of avoided that. And then I noticed you put in our notes. I read Ruby Weekly this morning and it said like Stripe API Gem version 5. I just like slammed my head.
Yeah, I saw that. There's some deprecations, like some method .all is renamed to .list, and a couple Ruby versions are dropped, and it didn't look like anything too big unless you were doing custom stuff with Faraday, because they've dropped Faraday in support of just net HTTP built into Ruby. So if you're doing any fancy connection stuff behind the scenes, which most of us aren't, but if you were, you're in for some troubles, because there's some configuration variables that you can replace, like the base URL for the API and stuff, and that's doable. But if you had, and this may be more stuff that, say, a Stripe Ruby mock or equivalent might be overriding for testing or something, you can imagine that replacement to net HTTP might be some work for anyone that's kind of built their own test tools to integrate with Faraday or something. So I don't know. It doesn't look like it's going to affect me or most people, but for the most part, it seems like it should be a reasonable upgrade. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, I feel like I just kind of like I don't know who I am anymore because I used to like get so excited about like upgrades and like I am really happy that Stripe is updating their gym. I'm just like I've been on the update path for so
Yeah,
long. I just like
you're on
break.
you're becoming a Debian user who refuses to upgrade any packages. And it's funny too because I had the same thing for a long time when I was using Linux and stuff as my main OS, and over time, like you have more responsibilities. So when you upgrade, stuff breaks. When you're new, you can upgrade and use the latest stuff because you don't have anything that's been running for 10 years or whatever and has to continue running. You just have less responsibilities, so upgrades are easier. And so now I understand that perspective a lot better than I did, 10 years ago when I was just in school fiddling around with software and operating systems and whatever. It is much more crucial to keep things going safely these days than my throwaway apps back then.
Yeah. You was it this week released video on Rails 6
I
multiple
did.
databases
Yeah.
for Go?
It's mostly just a little
Uh,
walkthrough on the config and that stuff. But yeah, it was a fun one to record, and it was not quite as uh, complete as you would like to see it because there's no support for like right now. If you have a primary database and two or three replicas, it doesn't really work. It doesn't have any built-in load balancing, so you would have to set up your own Postgres load balancer. Whether that's like an HA proxy or something, like you have to set that up outside of your application, which is typically what you're going to want to do anyways. But it is, nice if Rails had a basic load balancer. There's no support for sharding and those sorts of things, which is okay. Like this is just version one of all that. So yeah, have you looked into it?
I haven't really no. The only thing was I don't think I guess it was RailsConf last year. Eileen talked about it. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's really
Yeah, because she did.
the only
Yeah,
I
she
have to
did
it.
all kinds of work behind the scenes to make that happen. What's really neat is, you have to specify your databases now and your models, and your database config is more complicated. And it's one of those things too where like in the past you were specifying a database URL and you just had one. But obviously if you have multiple databases, you can't do that. So the new thing is your database.yaml has um, under development, test, staging, production, whatever you might have as your environments. Inside of there, you add an extra layer and you say, here we have a primary database and here we have a replica. We might have another primary database. And, you might be building an app that needs to access two databases. So you can define that in there and flag which ones are replicas, and Rails will know not to run migrations against the replicas, for example, which is really cool. And then you can define your migrations paths in that file as well, so that you can have separate migrations if you're um, for your two different databases or however many you have. So you can separate all those out. When you generate a migration, you can define the database in the Rails generate migration. You do like hyphen hyphen database and the name, and it will put it in the right folder and apply it to the right database, which is pretty cool. So as you can imagine, there's lots of internal changes, and all the core commands still work the same. So you can actually just run Rails DB migrate, and it will migrate all your databases. And if you just say Rails DB migrate primary, it would just migrate the primary database, which is pretty cool. So you can define uh, those names and then run your commands just against specific ones as you choose, which is neat. But I can't imagine how much work that was. So props to Eileen for everything she's done and extracted from GitHub. It's quite amazing.
Yeah. I have an app on Rails 6, but I haven't really used the parallel testing like built in yet. Like it just runs like two like parallel test suites, but I can push more. I just got to figure out how. I haven't even
Do you
looked
have
into
to
it.
configure anything
But
to do that? I don't. I don't think I've looked into it yet.
I don't think so. But like my iMac has several processors, and so like I have the parallel test gem that came before this in the Podia test suite, and it runs like across all my cores, and it's very fast. So I'm hoping that I can just get the same functionality with like out of the box, but I haven't looked at it. But it is a feature of Rails 6 I was very excited about.
Yeah, it's like just another dependency you can drop and use Rails core stuff for, which is always nice. I used to use like Timecop a bunch in testing, and there's built-in stuff in the Rails test suite now for that as well. And it's just nice to keep it simple and use those things and have less dependencies to manage. That's always source of pain. So yeah.
Yeah. Talking Rails 6, I woke up at like 6 this morning, which is a little early for me. So I was like, well, I'll upgrade one of those SaaS apps to Rails 6 because it was on like 5.
Is that what you do when you're groggy in the morning? Is just upgrade something?
Yeah, that's how I wake up. I just threw my coffee cup against the wall. I don't need you. I'll just upgrade Rails. So it wasn't horrible. I actually had already upgraded active storage. No, that's a lie. I'd upgraded Webpacker to 4 already.
Okay. Yeah.
So I needed something.
That's, I think, probably going to be one of the hardest parts of the upgrade for most people. If you weren't using Webpack at all, that'll be tough. And then if you were just upgrading it from 3.5 or whatever you might be using in the past to 4, has little nuances of like, remember the .babel RC files? If you forget to delete those, it still uses them instead of the babel config.js. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I may have dodged a bullet maybe by already having that done, but it only took me about an hour and some change to get it
that's
updated.
Nice.
The only problem I really had, and I was being really stubborn because like I was having some trouble with how I had done some things in terms of like how Zeitwerk.
Okay.
And it wasn't like crazy things. It was like I had an admin namespace for helpers. And there's actually a really cool, like Zeitwerk has a little command or like it's bin Rails, like Zeitwerk check or something. And it'll actually run through your app. Like it'll load it up and make sure that Zeitwerk can load everything as expected.
That is
very
nice.
cool.
Yeah.
So I like worked through that. I had a couple of other errors and I got it figured out. I don't remember what I did when I changed, but you can use the classic auto loading feature, but I was like, no, like I want to go all in.
Yeah.
So that probably took me like 20, 30 minutes to figure out.
That's super cool.
It's good. It feels good.
It's funny. And this is one of the things that would have been a failure with Zeitwerk is on Hatchbox I had named some module, but I had also done like the class version of it where it's like class module : class name, and that was also a module somewhere else with the same name, and like Rails was totally fine with it. I'm pretty sure. But I was having these weird issues with Sidekick where it would deadlock, and it turns out that was the reason. And it took me forever to find that, where it was like, oh yeah, Sidekick just hangs. There's no way to really find out why or what's going on. And eventually, I came across that and found like there used to be, and I don't know if this stuff works anymore with Zeitwerk or not, but there was some code around and config stuff in Rails around autoloaders that were specifically for these like deadlocks around loading a module in a class like parent that was the same name or whatever, because it could conflict. And I ran into that and finally solved it several weeks later. And I was like, boy, this is going to be nice to have Zeitwerk being able to be something that's just a lot more clear about what's going on. And like the Zeitwerk code is actually surprisingly pretty simple when you look into it. I mean, it's doing a lot, but when you look into it, it's like, wow, it's not that all that complicated. Like I would expect an autoloader to be doing some weird, interesting Ruby things. But I think it's going to be a really good addition to Ruby in general, because you don't have to use it only in Rails. You can use it with whatever you want. So I'm excited for that. But I bet that there are many little things that people have done that have worked in the classic autoloader that will have to be changed for Zeitwerk here in the future. So I'm sure we'll see a lot of issues or whatever come up in people's apps when they do the upgrade.
I'm really grateful for it because, like, I think it's going to solve a lot of problems moving forward. I had a weird issue. Maybe you can help me with, and if not, someone listening can help me with. So I have like a decorators folder in app, and I made like a concerns folder just for not actual like active whatever concerns, but just modules. But I wanted to follow the kind of same naming. So it's just a concerns folder and like a nameable module. And it was just module concerns because that was like the top level module name or folder name, and then module nameable. And when I tried to import that into a decorator, it couldn't find the module.
Is that a special case that's handled in Rails? Because I don't think normally when I create a concern that I put it in a module of concerns.
So I wondered that, and maybe I misread the docs, but I'm pretty sure that now with the new autoloader with Zeitwerk, they will be namespace concerns.
Okay. Because I'm pretty sure that there are some configuration things that you can do with Zeitwerk, such as that, where you could say like, skip this like the app folders are one. You don't have to say module controllers, users controller, or module decorators, user decorator. It knows that app and then the next folder don't really need to apply to the module auto loading. Like it doesn't require that name of controllers or views or helpers or whatever. So I wonder if they also have an exception in there for the concerns folder. Like if it's named that, then you don't have to put it in the module. I don't know though.
I didn't even think to like try and name it something else. I should do that. What I ended up doing was saying, is this a valuable use of my time because it's one method used in two places? I could just put that method in two places, which is what I did, and then everything.
Yeah, you should try that and see if it works. I remember looking into the Zeitwerk docs and seeing that you can customize some of that stuff. And I would venture to guess that Rails would have some config or something that says, don't require a module for this folder, for the concerns folders. potentially. I don't know, but it is worth looking into just to see. Because it does have some sort of rules for that, because it's not like everything has to go into module app, module controllers, application controller. It already ignores those top two levels of folder names. So
Yeah, I need to give that a
it
try.
makes me want to go boot up just a blank Rails app with Zeitwerk and then fiddle around and see how it works on its own, because I almost never
Yeah.
I don't think I ever, maybe I did in a few gems of setting up like because active support was where the autoloader lived in the past, I think, the classic one. And you'll see gems like devise, autoload classes and stuff, but I don't remember really using it too much myself. I mean, most of the gems I write just require the files straight off the bat. Which might be a little bit slower for the initial boot of applications and might be one of the causes people will see on boot times being a little bit slower, because you're doing a hard require every time. But that's the whole reason for the autoloader, if anyone wasn't familiar with that. It just allows your boot to happen faster. So you only have to load a file whenever you actually request the class or module. So that's pretty nice of a feature, but it also is like a requirement when you have a large application, probably like GitHub or Shopify. Like, you want to auto load stuff as much as possible. Um, so yeah, I'll be curious to hear what you figure out on that, and maybe you can report back to us next week on that.
Yeah. So Ruby 264, 256, and 247. Do you know what that is
There
about?
was some sort of security bug in RDoc, which I remember hearing about last week or something. Uh, it looks like it is a cross-site scripting vulnerability or multiple with jQuery shipped with RDoc, which is bundled in Ruby. So I don't know what the solution was, if it was just to remove jQuery and then uh, use vanilla JavaScript or something. But I think that's what was powering the navigation or something, or filtering or something in the RDoc generated files. Um, here it says jQuery before 3.0 is vulnerable to cross-site scripting attacks when a cross-domain AJAX request is performed without the data type option, causing text JavaScript responses to be executed. And that sounds awful. Similar, this is for jQuery 1.9.0. That's an old one. So yeah, it looks like it'll be good to upgrade, especially if you're using RDoc. There was for Ruby 2.5 and maybe 2.4 some bug fixes as well. 2.5 looks like this release includes about 40 bug fixes after the previous release and the security fix. So it looks like maybe it's the only one of the three that got some bug fixes, but sounds like a lot. So regardless, upgrade those Ruby versions. I just upgraded Hatchbox this morning to include all three of those versions. So yeah, update your production apps, especially if you're using RDoc.
jQuery, the demise of
Yeah,
Ruby.
well, it is. Lived a pretty good long life, and now it's slowly getting removed from everything. It's kind of crazy.
jQuery, I've been one that I'm trying to like just not hate on things anymore. Like I don't even really like hate Stripe. And I've like in the past kind of hated on jQuery, but like jQuery helped me ease my way into JavaScript,
Mm-hmm.
and I just want to like give it a big old hug because I got by so long without having to learn real
So
JavaScript.
many of us did, I think. And JavaScript itself was a pretty rough language to work with without jQuery. So there was almost no reason not to use jQuery, because it was just going to save you so much time. Luckily, now you've got a lot of things that are better. Of course, it's all still like something you kind of have to run through Babel though to make it browser compatible. But language has come a long ways. Still not super great, but it's getting better. So
It's a lot better to me. Like, I also take for granted Webpacker because, like, anytime I have to set up Webpack outside of it, that, like, I don't know, I always stumble somewhere, and like Webpacker
yep,
just works.
it's one of
It's
those
great.
things that it's. I remember all the tutorials about Webpack were always like, here, copy this config file or like build your own config file. And I was like, can't you guys just ship with some default config, please? Like, what is wrong with having some default here? And that was very well resolved by Webpacker, I feel like, for Rails. There were some growing pains with that, of course, but so far it seems quite stable these days.
I think Webpack 4 might have solved that config issue. Like, I think you can run Webpack 4 without the
Oh,
config.
okay.
Uh, but by that point, I'm already like mostly just building Rails app with
Yeah,
Webpacker.
there's been a few times where I've used Webpack. I guess for like the Tailwind CSS components or Tailwind stimulus components, that sort of thing, where to have like a
Mm.
static site or like a Jekyll with Webpack, um, and use it here and there, but it was pretty sparingly. So I don't have much recollection of like what I did to set it up, but I don't remember it being very bad. But
Jekyll with Webpack is a thing I've always struggled on. Like, I've just never been able to do it, and I always feel like so stupid when I try. But there's a starter pack out there that's like Tailwind Jekyll something. It's essentially like somebody has made a like it's got post CSS, purge CSS, Tailwind, and it just like works. And it's got like just some bin scripts you can run, like bin setup and bin start, and it just
ah,
works. And so I've just for my like static sites with
I'll
Tailwind.
have to
It's been
try
awesome.
that out because my personal site is really old, and I think I wrote either it may be using an old Bootstrap, but I'm pretty sure it was like mostly custom CSS for everything, and I want to upgrade it at some point, redesign it a bit, and it's not very mobile compatible right now. I noticed, but I don't really use it. But I do want to upgrade to like use Tailwind and ideally run through Purge CSS and all that. I'm really happy with Purge CSS that we've set up for Jumpstart Pro. It just like strips out so much CSS, and it does that too on Bootstrap, and whatever you have. It's just a cool tool, and it works really well. And is funnily how it's funny how just like trivial it is because it's like, hey, does this CSS selector appear in any of these HTML files or helpers? Yep. Okay, we'll keep it and move on to the next one. And it's just like almost stupid simple, but it works so well. You know, pretty neat.
It's cool.
Um,
Yeah, my personal site is using that thing I was just talking about. That like I don't know that I want to say like jumpstart thing, but that's confusing. You get what I'm saying. It's using that project, and I'm really happy with it. I built so those two SaaS apps I'm working on. I also did their marketing landing pages in that as well, and I'm just very
that's
happy.
cool. I'm gonna have to dive in sometime and do that if I ever have. This sounds like another one of those like say yes, just say yes. Do another project. What's the worst that could happen?
Yeah.
So,
Um, while we're talking about JavaScript, have you seen Trimmings?
no.
Okay, so somehow earlier this week, my Twitter was not on latest tweets, which is a shame. Anything but latest tweets is a sham. So it was on like top tweets, but this time it worked out because Sam Stevenson had commented on someone's sharing of a thing called Trimmings, and it is similar to like stimulus kind of ish in that like you set data attributes, but what it does is like give you some like basic functionality out of the box. So let me pull it up. It's very
That
cool.
sounds interesting.
So there's a thing, and it's you set this thing. It's Trimmings current, and it'll just look at the URL, and if it matches what you've provided, like what the link href is, it'll like set a class of like Trimmings current or something like that. Which is nice because it just
Huh.
works. There is auto submit, which you just put data trimmings auto submit on your form.
Oh, like when
Uh,
you're typing an email and you pause and it auto saves. That's cool. I built one
yeah.
of those in the Tailwind stimulus components, I think, that will
Oh,
automatically
cool.
do that. That's neat.
There's several. There's hotkeys, so like you can set up
Oh.
like hotkeys to do like events just with data attributes. There is a remove, there is a replace, and there is a toggle. And so I don't know. It just sounds like the I'm getting package crazy, I know, but it sounds like the next thing to add to like my TurboLinks stimulus
Mm-hmm.
life is something like this because it's just HTML means I have to write a little
Yeah,
less code, and it doesn't like it's
it's
that much magic.
repeatable stuff that come in handy all the time. Um, that sounds like something I would use pretty regularly, so I'll have to check that out.
You should make
But
a screencast on
it's
it since you don't
it's
have anything
not
else
built
to do.
on stimulus though, right?
I
Okay.
don't think so. What is Trimmings? It's just a zero configuration
Okay,
JavaScript
cool.
library.
So
It follows in the footsteps of libraries like TurboLinks and
nice.
Stimulus.
So yeah, that was kind of like what I was trying to do with the Tailwind set of components. Although some of those are not necessarily Tailwind specific. So maybe that's something that I extract out into more generic thing, and have those typical components, and the Tailwind one can have specific examples of classes to toggle here and there, because I have some of those too, like a toggle where you might want to use it for a pricing toggle between monthly and yearly, and you want to, you know, de-emphasize monthly when you click on yearly and emphasize that, like being able to flip those classes whenever you click on something was the goal of that. And it's not necessarily, I don't know that any of the, except for the default classes, I don't think any of it was actually Tailwind really that specific. So you could use it on Bootstrap or whatever too. I'm excited for Stimulus 2.0 to drop, which I don't know when it'll happen, but it's been, finally in that PR got updated, because that I looked this morning, that PR was updated or created like November of 2018. So it's been almost a full
Oh,
year of sitting around. So yeah, that should drop sometime soon, I'm hoping, and I'll do some screencasts on that. And actually, before we recorded, I was on the phone with Avdi talking about joining Ruby Tapas to do a episode on stimulus. So we should see that
very
in
cool.
the coming months. The process is longer than mine is with Go Rails, where I'm like, oh, I'll do an episode on that this week and just sit down and do it. And I don't write scripts or anything. So it'll be interesting to see his process, because, screencasting can go a million different directions. And, I've kind of developed my own strategy for it that works for me. And it'll be fun to record on Ruby Tapas and be part of that, because he's been making videos for so long and there's so much good content on there. So if anyone hasn't checked out Ruby Tapas, you definitely should. And then if you want to meet Avdi in person, come to Southeast Ruby next year.
Yeah, I don't know if we mentioned. I think
Are
we're gonna
you?
do it again.
Awesome. I know it was kind of up in the air, but I was hoping you would say yes.
Yeah, it's another thing, right? But it's always it's so draining. Then you get there and it's
Yeah.
so much fun. So I don't want to lose that this
Yeah,
year at
and it's
least.
just kind of one of those things where it's a good place to keep up with people and then meet other people, and I always enjoy that, like meeting people in person. That this was Southeast Ruby was like the first conference I went to after Go Rails had been growing for a little while, and it was so strange to attend and have like 25 people come up and be like, "Hey man, love your screencast," and I'm like, "What? Like real people watch these screencasts? That's strange."
It's not just bots
Yeah,
giving you
it's
money.
funny. Podcast feels the same way. You guys, not saying show up at our houses to be a live audience, but it's certainly weird to sit in your basement and just chat, but then find out that real people are listening and stuff. I'm sure that changes over time when you meet more people, but yeah, for the longest time, it always felt weird.
Yeah, I'm still not convinced. Even though people have told us, I'm just not convinced that anyone listens to this.
Well,
I, I think we just record into
yeah,
the
I
void.
mean, we're doing good enough for DHH to be on, so that's says something.
The
How
godfather of our
cool is that?
careers.
That was fun.
That was fun. Yeah, it was just weird to it wasn't in person, but like you just sit down and talk to him for an hour.
And he
That's pretty
kept his
cool.
promise from the episode and shoved Rail 6 out the door pretty much right away after. So that was great. Um, yeah, I don't think I have much else. I was just going to mention I did a couple episodes on locking of database records the other day because it's kind of strange, but I don't think people talk about locking of records in your database. I just thought I'd bring it up. But Rails has like these two things that you might have seen in applications before where like Basecamp's messages or like their document things, whatever they're called now, are a good example of this where you open up one of those to edit and it says like so and so is currently editing this just to warn you that like if you make changes you either cause yourself problems and you might lose your changes if they submit theirs or vice versa. And I wanted to mention like Rails has that built in where if you create a record, you can add a lock underscore version column, and out of the box, Rails will detect that and then increment that every time you update the record. So if you add that as a hidden field to your forms, when you submit, if that version from your form doesn't match what's in the database, you can have it raise an exception or it will raise an exception, and you can catch that and then warn the user that says like, "Hey, this record's been changed since you started editing. Do you want to submit or override what's in the database or refresh and see the latest version of it?" So I thought that was kind of cool.
That's
Have you ever built that?
I didn't know you could do that. I didn't know you could do that through a form. So my CTO at my last job, like I always talk about how smart he is. He would always be like, "Yeah, you should lock this here. Like, you missed this. This is the edge case that could happen." Like, he could
Uh
see
huh.
those things. So, like, I kind of used to like locking records and things like that, and really embracing transactions. But I didn't know about the other.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Because it's funny.
Better
It's really
user
funny
experience.
because most of the examples are like just in the terminal. But the real value of it is when you like embed that version number in the form. So then you could have that form open for a week in your browser and then submit it and
Mhm.
you can warn your user that, hey, someone else changed this while you were editing. So just so you know, you can choose, do you want to lose your changes or do you want to, try and submit them? So I did a screencast on that one. So if anybody's interested, that's on gorails.com. And the pessimistic locking is one and the names are kind of descriptive of what they do. The optimistic one is obviously like, we're not really going to prevent changes and lock anything on a database level. We're just going to use that version number and check and throw an error if it doesn't match. So it obviously is kind of assuming the optimistic case that it's unlikely you're going to run into race conditions or something, or conflicts. And the pessimistic one will actually lock the record in your database. And that one is for a different case because while the optimistic locking, you can put that version number in your form, which could be open for a week and still work. If you locked your database record for a week, you would break that whole thing, your whole app for anyone looking at that record, which would be terrible. So it's more of a case where you might be doing some multi-threaded work in Sidekick or something, and you don't ever want two jobs to be editing the same record at once. That'll do it on the database level. So it will actually pull the record and lock it. Your other thread will pull the record and see there's a lock, and it will wait until the first one is finished. And then when that first one's finished, it's built in. It will do the reload to get the latest data because it knows it was being worked on. So it does the reload for you automatically and then lets you do your work, which is pretty cool that all that's built into Rails. And
yeah, we did pessimistic locking. And it's awesome because it's just dot lock.
Yeah, and you can put it in a block and do, extra stuff and whatever. So if you were, for example, this is always the example, but if you're transferring money between bank accounts, you have to credit one and debit the other, and you never want that to happen two times where you credit one and then it like forgets the credit from the other transaction that happened at the same time. So in that video, I show an example of that where it's like, here's what would happen if we tried to remove money twice or pay for something twice. Your bank account just kind of generates free money here, which would be bad. Your bank doesn't want that. So I don't know. I just never see anyone talking about that stuff. And so I thought I'd bring it up on the podcast just in case anyone was interested in how you can lock your records from, two things happening at the same time, which happens a lot more than you might think.
That's something you're really good at, is like remembering things like that, because I learned these things and they just become like, I assume everyone else knows them. So it's really good that you bring that up, because it's
one thing you kind of learn and always is in the back of your mind, and it just becomes like a de facto way of thinking, and you forget that like, oh yeah, there might be a lot of people who don't know this yet or haven't experienced it, because in development it's not likely to happen. But when someone's bank account gets an extra $250 in it in production, you're going to have a real hard time figuring out what exactly happened, because these are the situations that are like, good luck debugging that from your logs. You're never going to find that. So, yeah, you have to be, like you were saying, your previous coworker was good at seeing those situations. It takes some practice to be able to keep those in mind and detect when that might happen and when you might want to deal with it. So, yeah, that is all I had for this week. As usual, we've hit our 1 hour. No matter what we do and sit down, we're like always going to hit an hour. So funny.
Yeah, it's good. Happy episode 50.
Dude, yeah, what's the big deal?
Yeah, I have nothing else to say.
Cool, man. Well, maybe you can get a little bit of a rest from Stripe, SCA, and all that at some point soon. Make sure you deploy everything tomorrow at 5 p.m.
Oh, I didn't mention this. So I deployed the payment intent change on Monday, and then I got sick Monday night.
Because of the change. I'm going to blame it on Stripe.
Probably. I blame it on that too. So Tuesday morning, like I I could not let my coworkers like have to clean up my mess. So like I was like on the couch, like hunched over, and they were like, "Go rest," and I was like,
Oh
"No,
man.
no."
Well, hope everything continues to go better, or stays solid and doesn't get any weird. It just seems like one of those situations where, like, yeah, all these existing customer cards we have on file are all gonna fail, and we didn't know it ahead of time. And it just seems like there's some nightmare scenarios that might happen. So fingers crossed.
If anyone has to do any of this, you can email me, and I am an open book on it. I know not all the right answers, but my brain has been so engulfed in it. Just email me.
Yeah,
I'll
or
talk to you
Starbucks
about
is
it.
hiring. So if you just want to quit programming altogether, there's other options out there.
Oh gosh.
Cool.
All right, man.
All right.
See ya.
See you next week.